On Thanksgiving Day, my millionaire son wrapped me in a warm hug and asked with a proud smile, "Mom, do you love the lakefront house I gifted you?" I froze, my smile faltering. The truth was, I hadn't received any house, no deed, no keys, nothing. Everyone around the table stared, waiting for my answer, unaware that his grand gesture was nothing more than a performance. And in that moment, I realized the gift wasn't for me, it was for his image. Can you imagine sitting down for Thanksgiving dinner, ready to celebrate, only for a single question to shatter your entire reality? That's what happened to me, Margaret. That's how I found out the daughter-in-law I trusted had been systematically bleeding me dry for 2 whole years. For so long, I, Margaret, had convinced myself that things would get better. For the past 2 years, I'd been working as a janitor, barely making ends meet. Every single day was a battle. I was rationing my blood pressure medication, stretching every pill, and wearing the same worn-out coat through 2 brutal winters. I kept telling myself, "This is temporary. Just hold on." My son, David, he was my pride and joy. At 35, he'd built an empire from nothing, a massively successful tech consulting firm with over 200 employees. I was so incredibly proud of him. After his father passed away 3 years ago, David just threw himself into his work. Our conversations became quick phone calls, all about business meetings and client dinners. I understood. Grief affects everyone differently. I just thought he was focused on building his future. Thanksgiving morning, the house felt different. I'd spent hours in my tiny kitchen, preparing all of David's favorite dishes. The grocery bill? It meant I'd be skipping lunch for the entire next week. But I didn't care. I wanted everything perfect for his visit. It had been 4 long months since I'd seen him in person. When David walked through my front door, I was honestly struck. Everything about him screamed money. His watch, his shoes, even that casual sweater he was wearing probably cost more than my entire monthly rent. And then, right behind him, walked Victoria, his wife of 3 years. She had on this cream-colored coat that looked like it belonged in a high-fashion magazine. Her blonde hair? Perfectly styled, not a single strand out of place, even with the November wind trying to mess it up. "Mom, the house smells incredible," David said, giving me a quick hug before stepping back to help Victoria with her coat. She smiled at me, that same polished, perfect smile she always wore. But her eyes always seemed to be calculating something. Weighing things. We sat down for dinner. I listened as David talked about expanding his business to the West Coast, his grand plans. Victoria chimed in occasionally, casually mentioning their recent trip to Europe, the elaborate renovations they were planning for their home. I just nodded and smiled, trying to hide the pang in my chest. Every detail she shared, every single one, was a stark reminder of the growing, gaping distance between my life and theirs. Then, as I was serving the pumpkin pie, David leaned back in his chair, a warm, genuine smile on his face. "Mom," he said, "I've been meaning to ask you something that's been on my mind." I put the pie server down, giving him my full attention. My heart swelled a little, hoping for some personal connection, a shared moment. "How are you enjoying the lake house I gave you 2 years ago?" he asked, his smile unwavering. "I know you've always loved being near the water." The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. I just stared at him, my mouth slightly open, trying to process what he just said. A lake house? My heart started to hammer against my ribs. Confusion, pure and utter confusion, washed over me. "What lake house, honey?" I never received any lake house." David's smile faltered. He looked at Victoria, who had gone completely still beside him. Her eyes were fixed on her plate. "The house on Lake Morrison," he pressed, clearly baffled. "I had it transferred to your name for your birthday 2 years ago. You don't remember?" I shook my head slowly, feeling lightheaded, almost dizzy. "David, I would remember receiving a house. I've never gotten anything like that. Are you sure you're not thinking of someone else?" Victoria suddenly stood up. Her napkin fluttered to the floor. "Oh," she said, her voice a little higher than usual, a little too bright. I just remembered. I need to make a phone call about tomorrow's appointment. Excuse me. She walked quickly toward the kitchen, pulling out her phone, but something about her movements felt wrong. Urgent. In a way that made my stomach clench with an awful premonition. David was frowning now, his businessman's mind clearly trying to solve a puzzle that wasn't adding up. Mom, that's impossible. I specifically had my assistant handle all the paperwork. The deed should have been mailed to you. And there were supposed to be monthly maintenance payments set up, too. Monthly payments. My legs felt like jelly. What monthly payments? I whispered. The $1,500 I've been sending you every month to help with expenses, he said, his voice laced with confusion. My assistant assured me you were receiving everything. The room seemed to tilt. $1,500 a month. For 2 years. That was $36,000. $36,000. Enough to have changed everything for me. Enough to buy the medications I needed without rationing, to fix my old, sputtering car, to not worry about every single grocery purchase. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. David, I swear to you, I haven't received any monthly payments. I've been struggling just to pay for my blood pressure medication. Last month, I had to choose between groceries and keeping the electricity on. David's face went white. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. That's impossible. I have receipts, bank transfers. Everything should be documented. From the kitchen, I could hear Victoria's voice, low and urgent, though I couldn't make out the words. My hands started trembling as the full, awful weight of the situation began to settle over me. Show me, I whispered. Show me the paperwork. David was already pulling out his phone, scrolling through emails with increasing desperation. I have copies of everything at home, he muttered. The deed transfer, the payment confirmations. Mom, if you haven't been getting this money, then where has it been going? We both turned toward the kitchen at the exact same moment. Victoria's voice had stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with guilt. I stood up on unsteady legs and walked toward the kitchen doorway. Victoria was standing with her back to us, phone pressed to her ear, but she wasn't talking anymore. When she heard our footsteps, she spun around, her face flushed. Everything okay? David asked. But his tone had changed. It was the voice he used in business meetings when he suspected someone wasn't being truthful. Victoria's smile looked strained, a mask barely holding. Of course, darling. Just confirming our dinner plans for tomorrow. But I could see it now. The guilt was written all over her features. The way she couldn't quite meet my eyes. The nervous way she was fidgeting with her wedding ring. Victoria, David said slowly. His gaze was piercing. Do you know anything about the lake house paperwork? You helped coordinate with my assistant on several things around that time. The silence that followed felt endless. Victoria's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. In that moment, looking at her face, at the raw panic in her eyes, I knew. Somehow, someway, she had taken what was meant for me. This Thanksgiving, the one I'd worked so incredibly hard to make perfect, was about to become the day my family fell apart. The silence in my small dining room stretched, thin and taut, ready to snap. Victoria stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, her perfectly manicured hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. David was staring at his wife with an expression I'd never seen before, a terrible mixture of confusion and a cold, dawning suspicion. Victoria, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. Where is my lake house? She swallowed hard, her eyes darting frantically between David and me. There must be some misunderstanding. Maybe the paperwork got lost in the mail. Or perhaps there was an error at the bank. But even as she spoke, I could see the lie forming in her eyes. After working as a janitor for 15 years, cleaning offices late at night, I'd learned to read people. You see a lot when you're invisible to most folks, when they talk around you like you're not even there. Victoria was lying, and she wasn't very good at it. David pulled out his phone again. I'm calling Rebecca, my assistant. She handled all of this personally. No, wait, Victoria said quickly, stepping forward, a desperate plea in her voice. Maybe we should discuss this privately first. Your mother has been through a lot, and I don't want to upset her more if this is just a simple mix-up. A cold anger built in my chest. Upset me more? I'd been living on crackers and peanut butter for dinner most nights while she wore designer clothes and took European vacations. But I kept my voice calm, almost eerily so. Victoria, honey, I think we're past worrying about upsetting me. I need to know where my house is. David was already dialing. Within seconds, I heard a woman's voice on the other end. Rebecca, it's David. I need you to pull up the paperwork for the lake house I purchased for my mother 2 years ago. There was a pause. Then Rebecca's voice became clearer as David put the phone on speaker. Of course, Mr. Harrison. The property at 1247 Lake Morrison Drive. The deed was transferred to Margaret Harrison on November 15th, 2 years ago. I have copies of all the signed documents. My heart pounded. That was my name. My address for the paperwork. But I had never signed anything. And the monthly payments? David asked, his voice tight. All processed as requested, sir. $1,500 transferred on the first of every month to the account you specified. Account holder named Margaret Harrison. Routing number ending in 4782. I felt the blood drain from my face. I don't have an account ending in 4782. I whispered, my voice barely audible. My account ends in 9156. David's eyes snapped to Victoria. Rebecca, can you read me the full account number? As Rebecca rattled off the numbers, I watched Victoria's face crumble. It wasn't my account. It wasn't even close. Rebecca, David said, his voice dangerously quiet, cutting through the stunned silence. Who provided you with this account information? Your wife, sir. Mrs. Harrison called me in December, 2 years ago, and said there had been a change in your mother's banking information. She provided the new routing and account numbers and asked me to update all the records. The phone slipped slightly in David's hand. Victoria made a small, desperate sound in the back of her throat. And the deed? David continued, relentlessly. Where was it supposed to be mailed to? The address Mrs. Harrison provided. Let me see. 847 Maple Street, apartment 2B. I'd never lived on Maple Street. I'd been in the same small house for 10 years. David hung up the phone. The silence that followed was deafening. When he looked at Victoria, his face was completely blank, which somehow seemed more terrifying than anger would have been. Explain, he said simply. Victoria's composure finally shattered. Tears started flowing down her cheeks, but they looked more like sheer panic than genuine remorse. David, you have to understand. My parents were about to lose their house. They're elderly, and my father's medical bills were bankrupting them. I just borrowed the money temporarily. Borrowed? I whispered, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. You mean stole? No. Victoria's voice rose, shrill and frantic. I was going to pay it back. I just needed time. And the lake house, it's not like you were using it. My family needed a place to stay while they got back on their feet. Something cracked inside my chest. Not like I was using it? Victoria, I said, my voice rising too, with a raw, desperate anger. I've been working double shifts to afford my medication. I've been eating 1 meal a day just to make my grocery money stretch. I haven't been able to turn my heat above 60 degrees because I can't afford the electric bill. David was staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. His eyes were wide with a horrifying realization. Victoria, my mother could have died. What if she'd had a medical emergency and couldn't afford treatment? But she didn't, Victoria said desperately, almost accusingly. She's fine. She's healthy. My father has diabetes and heart problems. He needed the money more. The callousness of her words hit me like a physical blow. Fine? Healthy? I thought about the nights I'd lain awake, chest tight with stress, wondering how I'd pay for my next prescription. The times I'd stood in the grocery store, calculator in hand, putting items back on the shelf because I simply couldn't afford them. "Where is my house now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Victoria wiped her nose with the back of her hand, her designer makeup smearing. "My parents are living there. And my brother's family. They've been renovating it, making improvements. With my money," David said flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. Victoria nodded miserably. I sank into my chair, feeling suddenly, utterly exhausted. For 2 years I told myself that David was too busy to check on me regularly, that his success meant he didn't need to worry about his mother anymore. I'd been so proud of his independence, even as I struggled alone. But all this time, he thought he was taking care of me. He thought I was comfortable and secure. "Mom," David said, his voice cracking slightly, tears welling in his eyes. "I'm so sorry. I thought you were okay. I thought you had everything you needed." I looked at my son, this successful man who'd worked so hard to build a better life for himself. And I saw the little boy who used to promise he'd take care of me when he grew up. He tried to keep that promise. But the woman he trusted most in the world had stolen it from both of us. "How much?" I asked Victoria, my voice barely a thread. "How much of my money did you take?" She was quiet for a long, painful moment. "All of it?" she finally whispered. $36,000 in payments, plus a house that was probably worth at least $200,000 more. Victoria's family had been living like kings on money that was meant to keep me from poverty. David stood up slowly, his movements careful and controlled. "Victoria, pack your things. I want you out of my house tonight." "David, please," she begged, reaching for him, her voice a desperate wail. "We can fix this. I'll make it right. I'll find a way to pay your mother back." He stepped away from her touch, his expression stone cold. "With what money? You haven't worked a day since we got married. Everything you have, everything your family has been living on, was stolen from my mother." I watched my daughter-in-law fall apart, her elegant facade crumbling into a weeping mess. And I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just a hollow emptiness where trust used to be. She'd looked me in the eye for 2 years. She'd sat at this very table, knowing I was struggling, knowing I was rationing pills, while her family lived in luxury at my expense. As Victoria's sobs echoed through my small dining room, I realized that this Thanksgiving would indeed be unforgettable. But not because of the family gathering I'd hoped for. It would be remembered as the day I learned that sometimes the people who smile the brightest are the ones hiding the darkest, most devastating secrets. After Victoria left that night, sobbing and begging for forgiveness that neither David nor I could possibly give, my house felt different. Quieter, yes, but not peaceful. The silence was heavy with unanswered questions and the crushing weight of betrayal that seemed to settle into every corner. David wanted to call his lawyer immediately, but I asked him to wait. Not because I was having second thoughts about pursuing this, but because something told me we needed to know the full extent of what Victoria had done before we moved forward. Thieves rarely steal just once, and I had a feeling this went deeper than a house and some monthly payments. "Mom, you don't need to do anything," David said, sitting across from me at my kitchen table, his expensive suit wrinkled from the long, awful day. "Let me handle everything. You've been through enough." But I shook my head. For 2 years, I'd been the unknowing victim of Victoria's elaborate lies. I'd been helpless, completely unaware, while she systematically robbed me of what little security I might have had. Now I knew the truth. And I wasn't going to sit back and let others handle my business. "I need to see it all," I told him. "Every document, every bank record, every piece of paperwork. I need to understand exactly what she did to me." The next morning, after David went home to change clothes and gather documents, I called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. Mrs. Henderson, my supervisor, was surprised but understanding when I told her I had a family emergency. If only she knew the half of it. David returned with boxes of paperwork and his laptop. We spread everything across my small dining table, the very same table where Victoria had sat just hours before, playing the role of the concerned daughter-in-law while hiding her monstrous crimes. The first document we examined was the deed to the lake house. My signature was there, clear as day, on a document I'd never seen before. But as I stared at it, something seemed off. "This isn't how I signed my name," I said, pointing to the messy scrawl. "Look at the M in Margaret. I always make it with a little loop at the top, but this one is just straight lines." David pulled out his phone and took a picture of the signature, then found an old birthday card I'd signed for him last year. The differences were subtle but clear once you knew what to look for. "She forged your signature," he said, his voice flat with cold anger. We kept digging. The bank records showed that the monthly payments had been going to an account that was indeed in my name, but at a bank I'd never done business with. Someone had opened an account using my personal information. "I need to see this account," I said, feeling a surge of determination. David called the bank, but they wouldn't give him information over the phone since he wasn't an account holder. So, we drove there together, my hands shaking as I walked into the grand marble lobby of First National Bank with my driver's license and social security card. The account had been opened 2 years and 1 month ago, just weeks before the first payment was supposed to go to me. The address on file? 847 Maple Street, Apartment 2B. The same address Rebecca had mentioned. The phone number listed wasn't mine either. "Ma'am," the bank representative said, looking confused as she scrolled through the records. "You've never actually been in this branch before, have you?" "No," I said firmly. "I've never been here in my life." She showed us the signature card from when the account was opened. The same fake version of my name, signed by someone who wasn't me. "This is identity theft," the representative said, her voice now filled with genuine concern. "You need to file a police report immediately." But we weren't done yet. David had brought copies of all his financial records related to my care. And as we sat there in the bank's customer service area, a more complete, horrifying picture began to emerge. The monthly payments were just the beginning. David had also been sending additional money for my medical expenses, money I'd never seen. $500 when he thought I needed new glasses, $800 for what he believed was dental work, $1,000 last Christmas as a bonus. Every single payment had gone to the fake account. "How much?" I asked, though I was terrified to hear the answer. David's fingers moved across his phone's calculator. His face went pale. $43,000. Over 2 years, she stole $43,000 from you. I felt dizzy. $43,000 was more money than I'd ever had in my life. It was enough to have changed everything. Enough to have given me security and comfort in my older years instead of the constant stress of living paycheck to paycheck. We drove to 847 Maple Street next. It was a rundown apartment complex on the other side of town, the kind of place with flickering neon signs and broken concrete steps. Apartment 2B was empty, with a for rent sign in the window. She probably rented it just long enough to establish the fake address, David said, his jaw tight with anger. But I was thinking about something else. "David, how did she get my personal information? My social security number, my date of birth, all the details. She'd need to open that account?" He was quiet for a moment. "From our house. I keep copies of important family documents in my home office. She would have had access to everything." The betrayal cut deeper with each new revelation. Victoria hadn't just seen an opportunity and taken it. She'd planned this carefully, systematically stealing my identity and my money while living in my son's house, eating at his table, pretending to love him. That evening, as we sat in my living room, surrounded by overwhelming evidence of Victoria's crimes, David looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I trusted her completely. I never thought to verify that you were receiving the money because she was the one who suggested I send it in the first place. That detail hit me like ice water." "She suggested it?" David nodded miserably. "About 6 months after Dad died, she mentioned how worried she was about you managing on your own. She said it would be a wonderful gesture if I could help with your expenses, especially since business was going so well. She even offered to coordinate with Rebecca to set everything up." I closed my eyes, feeling the full, crushing weight of Victoria's manipulation. She'd positioned herself as the caring daughter-in-law, concerned about her husband's struggling mother, while secretly ensuring that every single dollar meant for me would end up in her family's pockets. And the lake house? David continued, his voice heavy with self-reproach. Same thing. She said you'd mentioned wanting to live near water, that it would be good for your health and peace of mind. She helped me find the property, negotiated the price, handled all the paperwork. Victoria had played my son like a violin, using his love for me against both of us. She'd made him feel generous and caring, while systematically robbing me of everything he tried to give me. As David gathered up the papers to take to his lawyer, I sat alone in my living room, staring at the walls I'd grown so familiar with over the past 2 years. This small, cramped space, with its old furniture and broken air conditioner, wasn't supposed to be my reality. I was supposed to be living comfortably in a beautiful house by the lake, with enough money to buy my medications without counting pennies. Instead, Victoria's parents were probably sitting by that lake right now, enjoying their stolen retirement, while I'd been rationing my blood pressure pills and wearing second-hand clothes. But knowing the truth, as painful as it was, felt like the first step toward getting my life back. Victoria had stolen more than money from me. She'd stolen 2 years of security, of dignity, of the peace of mind that comes with knowing your child is taking care of you. Tomorrow, we'd start the process of getting it all back. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, I went to bed knowing exactly where I stood. And that knowledge, bitter as it was, felt like power. The morning David's lawyer called with the results of his investigation, I was scrubbing floors at the office building where I'd worked for the past decade. My knees ached against the cold tile, and my hands were raw from the industrial cleaning solutions. But I kept working, because I needed every dollar from this job. At least I thought I did. Mrs. Harrison. Mr. Patterson's voice was grim when I called him back during my lunch break. We need to meet immediately. What we've uncovered goes far beyond what we initially suspected. David picked me up after my shift. His face was drawn with exhaustion. He'd barely slept since Thanksgiving, throwing himself into the investigation with the same fierce intensity he brought to his business deals. But this wasn't business. This was personal, and it was destroying him. At the lawyer's office, we sat across from Mr. Patterson as he laid out a file thick with documents. Victoria didn't just steal from you, Mrs. Harrison. She's been running what amounts to a small-scale fraud operation using your identity. The room seemed to tilt. He explained that Victoria had used my personal information to open not just the one bank account, but 3 separate accounts at different banks. She'd applied for credit cards in my name, taken out a small loan, and even filed false tax returns claiming me as a dependent while reporting income I'd never earned. The IRS has been trying to contact you about discrepancies in your tax filings. Mr. Patterson continued, his voice grave. They've been sending notices to the fake address. You're currently under investigation for tax evasion. I felt like I was drowning. Tax evasion? But I filed my taxes honestly every year. We know that now, he said, but the IRS doesn't. Victoria has been reporting that you received the money David sent. Money that you never actually got. From their perspective, you've been hiding income. David's hands were clenched into fists. How much did she steal in total? Mr. Patterson flipped through several pages, tallying the original $43,000, plus additional credit card spending, loan proceeds, and fraudulent tax refunds. We're looking at approximately $78,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $78,000. I made $18,000 a year scrubbing floors. Victoria had stolen more than 4 years of my salary. And the house, Mr. Patterson said. That's where it gets more complicated. The property is legally in your name, Mrs. Harrison, based on the forged deed. Victoria's family has been living there, making improvements with the stolen money, and they've actually increased the property value significantly. I thought about Victoria's parents, whom I'd met only twice at family gatherings. They'd seemed like nice people, a little overwhelmed by their daughter's wealthy lifestyle, but grateful for her success. Had they known where the money was coming from? Had they known they were living in a house stolen from their son-in-law's mother? Can we get it back? David asked, his voice strained. Yes, but we'll need to involve law enforcement. This isn't a civil matter anymore. This is criminal fraud, identity theft, and tax evasion. Victoria could face serious prison time. I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the woman who'd sat at my table just days ago, crying and begging for forgiveness. She'd seemed genuinely remorseful. But now, I wondered if those tears had been real or just another manipulation. What about her family? I asked. Her parents, her brother with the children? Mr. Patterson's expression was sympathetic but firm. They'll have to vacate the property. If they can prove they didn't know the money was stolen, they might avoid criminal charges, but they can't keep what was bought with fraudulent funds. David was staring out the window, his jaw tight. Where is Victoria now? She's staying with her parents at the lake house, Mr. Patterson said. Our investigator confirmed she's been there since she left your house on Thanksgiving. So, she ran straight to the people who'd been living off my mother's stolen money, David said bitterly. Of course she did. That afternoon, we drove to Lake Morrison. I'd never seen the house that was supposedly mine. And as we pulled into the long driveway, I gasped despite myself. It was beautiful. A sprawling ranch-style home with large windows overlooking the water, surrounded by mature trees and well-maintained gardens. This was what David had intended for me. This peaceful, comfortable place where I could have spent my retirement years watching the sunset over the lake, instead of worrying about whether I could afford my next meal. Victoria's father answered the door, his face falling when he saw David and me. Oh, he said quietly. We've been expecting you. Victoria appeared behind him, looking smaller and younger than I'd ever seen her. Her designer clothes had been replaced with jeans and an old sweater, and her face was puffy from crying. Margaret, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry. I looked at her. This woman who'd smiled at me across countless dinner tables while systematically destroying my financial security, and I felt nothing but cold anger. Are you? I asked. Are you really sorry, Victoria? Or are you just sorry you got caught? She started crying again, but I wasn't moved. I'd seen her tears before, had believed in them. Had even felt sorry for her sometimes when David worked long hours, and she seemed lonely. I never meant for it to go this far. She sobbed. It started with just borrowing the first payment to help my parents with their mortgage. I was going to put it back before anyone noticed, but you didn't, David said, his voice like ice. You took more and more. You stole my mother's identity, filed false tax returns, opened credit cards in her name. That's not borrowing, Victoria. That's fraud. Victoria's mother had appeared in the doorway, her face streaked with tears. We didn't know, she said desperately. We thought David was just being generous, helping us through a difficult time. Victoria told us he'd insisted on buying us the house. I looked at this older woman, probably close to my age, and I saw genuine shock and horror in her eyes. She hadn't known. None of them had known except Victoria. The IRS thinks I'm a tax cheat because of what your daughter did, I said quietly, the weight of that threat making my voice tremble. I could go to prison because Victoria filed false returns in my name. Victoria's mother gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. Oh my God, Victoria, what have you done? But Victoria just kept crying, offering excuses and apologies that meant nothing now. She'd had 2 years to confess, 2 years to make this right, and she'd chosen to dig deeper instead. Mr. Patterson stepped forward with a briefcase full of legal documents. Mrs. Stevens, I'm going to need you and your family to vacate this property within 30 days. Everything purchased with the fraudulent funds will need to be returned or compensated for. As I watched Victoria's family absorb the devastating reality of their situation, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not satisfaction, not revenge, just relief that the truth was finally out in the open. The police will be here tomorrow to arrest Victoria. Mr. Patterson continued. I'd recommend she turn herself in voluntarily. Victoria looked up at David with desperate, pleading eyes. Please don't let them arrest me. I'll pay everything back. I promise. I'll get a job. I'll work day and night." David shook his head sadly. "With what skills, Victoria? You've never worked a day in your life. You don't even know how to work. All you know how to do is take." As we left the lake house, I turned back for one last look at the place that should have been my home for the past 2 years. Soon it would be, but it felt hollow now, tainted by the knowledge of how Victoria had stolen it from me. "Mom," David said as we drove away, "I'm going to make sure you never want for anything again. I'm going to take care of you the way I should have been doing all along." I patted his hand gently. "You were taking care of me, honey. It's not your fault that Victoria stole what you gave me." But as we drove back toward my small, cramped house, I knew that everything was about to change. Victoria would face the consequences of her crimes, and I would finally get the security and comfort that David had always intended for me to have. The confrontation was over. Now came justice. The divorce papers were finalized on a gray Tuesday in February, 3 months after that devastating Thanksgiving dinner. I sat in the courthouse hallway beside David as his lawyer emerged from the courtroom with news that Victoria had signed everything without contest. She'd already been sentenced to 18 months in prison for fraud and identity theft. And fighting the divorce would have only added legal fees she couldn't afford. "It's done," Mr. Patterson said, sitting down beside us. "The marriage is dissolved. All assets purchased with stolen funds revert to their rightful owners. Mrs. Harrison, you now legally own the lake house, and all the money in the fraudulent accounts has been frozen pending full restitution." David let out a long breath, a sigh of release. "What about her family?" "They vacated the property last week," Mr. Patterson replied. "Her parents moved in with her brother temporarily, and they've been surprisingly cooperative. I think they're genuinely horrified by what Victoria did." I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that this nightmare was finally ending, but sadness for the collateral damage. Victoria's parents were innocent victims, too, in their own way. They'd lost their home and their savings. All because their daughter had chosen to steal instead of asking for help. Honestly, the weeks that followed were a whirlwind of paperwork and adjustments. David threw himself into making things right with the same fierce intensity he'd once brought to building his business. He hired a team of accountants to untangle Victoria's fraudulent tax filings, worked with the IRS to clear my name, and personally oversaw every single detail of transferring ownership of the lake house back to me. But the most important change was in David himself. The successful businessman who'd been too busy for regular phone calls became a son who stopped by every few days, who called just to check on me, who insisted on taking me to doctor's appointments and grocery shopping. "You don't have to hover, honey," I told him one afternoon as he helped me pack the few belongings I wanted to keep from my old house. "I'm not going anywhere." He paused, folding one of my old quilts, his hands stilling on the soft fabric. "Mom, I missed 2 years of your life because I was stupid enough to trust Victoria completely. I'm not missing anymore." I understood his guilt, even though I didn't think he deserved it. Victoria had been a master manipulator, playing on his love for me to hide her crimes. But I also understood that trust, once broken so completely, takes time to rebuild, even trust in yourself. Moving into the lake house felt surreal. The place was beautiful, but it carried the heavy,